The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
The United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. We will be instituting the highest level of economic sanction. America will not be held hostage to nuclear blackmail. We will not allow American cities to be threatened with destruction. And we will not allow a regime that chants death to America to gain access to the most deadly weapons on earth. As we exit the Iran deal, we will be working with our allies to find a real, comprehensive, and lasting solution to the Iranian nuclear threat.
That was your president, President Donald Trump, announcing yesterday that he is withdrawing the United States from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, also known as the Iranian Nuclear Deal. And this is something, before I go into any analysis of it, this is something that the United States, or rather Donald Trump, has wanted to do since he began running for office, since the deal. Honestly, since the implementation of the deal, Donald Trump, to understand his thinking, understand that Donald Trump has one agenda, him personally. There are people around him who have different agendas, and they have found a way, a very convenient way, to get their agenda accomplished in the midst of Donald Trump's very narcissistic, myopic agenda. His personal agenda is to undo anything and everything he can possibly undo that President Obama did. He's not concerned about the rationale, the logic, or the danger that undoing some of these things will cause or place the United States in, our allies. He's not concerned about any of that. He's not concerned about any of the real capacity of Iran, whether or not they will come into the international fold. He's not concerned about those outcomes. He's using straw men. And I use that not to try to make this a thing solely about logic, but I just want you to understand he has one purpose and one purpose only as the president of the United States, and that is to really stick it to President Obama. And the reason I bring up the straw man is because he throws things into the equation with regard to the Iranian nuclear deal that were never intended to be covered by the Iranian nuclear deal. For example, he continuously brings up Iran's being a state sponsor of terrorism and their support for Hezbollah. That's not something that was intended to be covered by the Iranian nuclear deal. It's almost as if Donald Trump is insisting that we get everything we possibly would ever want out of Iran in order for us to accept that they won't continue to try to obtain nuclear weapons. But this, again, is nothing more than a red herring / a straw man, something for him to grandstand over, because in reality, he doesn't really care about the nature of the deal. He just cares that he gets rid of the deal because to him, it's a bad deal. Now, this is Donald Trump personally. In terms of the people that he surrounded himself with, well, they have had long plans of overthrowing the regime in Tehran. This has been the dream of neoconservatives since before the Iraq War. And now they have found the perfect vessel through which they can finally accomplish their dream. Never mind that he doesn't really understand the nature of the deal, probably hasn't read the first paragraph of the deal. Never mind that his arguments are fallacious at best. All they know is that they finally have a president that will allow them to go into Iran and overthrow the regime. That's it. And so here we are. The president is now using quote unquote evidence from Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, that really turned out not to be much of evidence at all. But it is one of the laziest attempts at wagging the dog. It's one of consider the contortions that the United States went through to take us into Iraq. I mean, they really went through some hurdles. I mean, they went through a fine specimen of kabuki theater with testimonies before Congress, intelligence briefings, leaked sources to the New York Times, the New York Times running articles about it, and then the White House using the New York Times article that they leaked information to in order to substantiate their claims. I mean, they really went through hurdles, and all we got in this case was a PowerPoint presentation from Benjamin Netanyahu. Listen to what he had to say last week that the president is now citing as evidence for why we should pull out of the deal.
After signing the nuclear deal in 2015, Iran intensified its efforts to hide its secret nuclear files. In 2017, Iran moved its nuclear weapons files to a highly secret location in Tehran. This is the Shorbad district in southern Tehran. This is where they kept the atomic archives, right here. Few Iranians knew where it was, very few, and also a few Israelis. Now, from the outside, this was an innocent-looking compound. It looks like a dilapidated warehouse. But from the inside, it contained Iran's secret atomic archives locked in massive files. Actually, they're a little bigger than that. A few weeks ago, in a great intelligence achievement, Israel obtained half a ton of the material inside these.
Now, the very last word was cut off. He said inside these walls. Now, the presentation was set up with graphs, with maps, with satellite imagery. And most people who watched that, I can't say most people, but I get the impression that many people who watched that believe that Benjamin Netanyahu revealed evidence that Iran was still proliferating nuclear weapons or in some fashion violating the Iranian nuclear deal. In fact, he almost gives you the impression that Israeli intelligence found actual nuclear material. Right? That's the impression. That's the magnitude of the event that he was presenting in English during prime time in Israel, primetime television hours in Israel. I mean, clearly he wasn't speaking to the Israeli people. But I digress. We know he was talking to Donald Trump and no one else. But the presentation would make you think that he actually found some new evidence of nuclear material or proliferation or the reinstating their nuclear program, something. But he's actually talking about documents. They found archived documents of their previous nuclear program, documents that U.S. intelligence already knew about. In fact, I would argue that this information could have been passed to him by Mike Pompeo, who was there just 2 days before this conference. But that's my conspiracy theory. Setting that aside, because we don't deal in conspiracy, setting that aside, here's some great reporting from NBC on the very issue that really succinctly outlines how ridiculous of a presentation this was, but yet how dangerous it is going to be used or has been used to underscore Donald Trump's decision to pull out of the nuclear deal.
As Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu makes a dramatic case against it.
Iran lied.
Showing off copies of thousands of documents and discs.
183 CDs.
Reportedly stolen by Israeli spies from a warehouse in Tehran. Evidence, he says, that Iran once was trying to build a nuclear weapon.
The nuclear deal is based on lies. It's based on Iranian lies and Iranian deception. 100,000 files right here prove that they lied.
But no smoking gun that Iran still has a nuclear weapons program today. The elaborate PowerPoint to bolster President Trump's inclination to tear up the deal next week. Mr. Trump reacting 20 minutes later.
What we've learned has really shown that I've been 100% right.
Echoing his newly minted Secretary of State with Netanyahu in Tel Aviv 2 days ago.
President Trump's been pretty clear. This deal is very flawed. He's directed the administration to try and fix it. And if we can't fix it, he's going to withdraw from the deal.
Even though Mike Pompeo, only weeks ago, then still CIA director, acknowledged Iran is adhering to the nuclear agreement.
With the information that I've been provided, I've seen no evidence that they are not in compliance today.
That was reporting by Andrea Mitchell of MSNBC and NBC. And I mean, listen, I clowned Andrea Mitchell last week because of her ridiculous statements about Michelle Wolf at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And so I just want to put that out there because it's just a good example of some days people can be trash and some days they can do some really fire ass reporting, because that's great work right there. Really outlining the case that everything that Benjamin Netanyahu said was ridiculous, old information that does not support any claim that Iran is not complying with the nuclear agreement. Number one. Number two, she set it up perfectly to show that immediately after Benjamin Netanyahu did his spiel, then Donald Trump comes out and echoes it and says, see, I was right. This is the laziest form of kabuki theater, but they did it. They tried it. And then Mike Pompeo, who was in Israel 2 days before this grand announcement, thus my conspiracy, but never mind my conspiracy, Mike Pompeo, who is now championing what both Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump are saying, he previously just said 3 weeks ago in his confirmation hearing that he had no evidence to date that Iran actually is in violation of the deal. But yet here we are. The president of the United States is unilaterally pulling the United States out of the agreement at the behest of world leaders.
The Secretary General is deeply concerned by today's announcement. The Secretary General has consistently reiterated that the JCPOA represents a major achievement in nuclear nonproliferation and diplomacy. It is essential that all concerns regarding the implementation of the plan be addressed through the mechanisms established in the JCPOA. The Secretary General calls on other JCPOA participants to abide fully by their respective commitments.
The nuclear deal with Iran is crucial for the security of the region, of Europe, and of the entire world. I'm particularly worried by the announcement tonight of new sanctions. The nuclear deal with Iran is the culmination of 12 years of diplomacy. The European Union is determined to preserve it, to the Iranian citizens and leaders. Do not let anyone dismantle this agreement. It is one of the biggest achievements diplomacy has ever delivered. Stay true to your commitments, as we will stay true to ours.
The second voice that you heard, or the last voice that you just heard, was that of Federica Mogherini. She is the European Union High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security. The first voice that you heard was that of Stéphane Dujarric, and he is a spokesperson for the UN Secretary General. And the language could not be any more precise or clear. America is isolating itself with this. And world leaders are insisting that we do everything that the world, not we, because the United States is isolated, that the world continues to do everything that it can to support this deal in the absence of the United States of America. Even calling on the people directly speaking to the people of Iran, saying that the United States is wrong here. The implications of it go so far and so wide and so deep. Because this is showing the weakness of the United States, the weakness of democracy, the ability to elect. I mean, this has always been a problem with democracy that we happily live with. It's just we always have hoped that we would elect leaders who would not create these types of disasters unnecessarily, right? Some conflicts become necessary. This is a conflict that is entirely unnecessary. And that's a problem with democracy. There's always the ability to elect in some type of oafish buffoon who would lead the nation into a disaster. And so they're exposing one of the problems of democracy, but they're also showing just very specifically that the United States cannot be trusted, that our word is not good. Our word is only as good as what president we have in office. And this is a key fundamental tenet of international theory, international relations, treaties. It is a core component of international treaties that agreements must be kept. I've referenced this in previous podcasts, the Latin phrase pacta sunt servanda. Agreements must be kept. It's at the core of international agreements. And this means that inside of your nation, in your state, no matter who gets in power, you keep the agreements of the previous leader. Because without that stability and that assurance, then there's no reason for a nation to enter into an agreement with you out of fear of the next administration simply undoing it. And this is why it's so critically important, this moment, particularly on the heels of what's happening in North Korea, the possibility of peace process, of a denuclearization of North Korea in Pyongyang. Pyongyang. And, I've seen today people referencing the fact that 3 prisoners were released from North Korean jails, American prisoners released in advance of Mike Pompeo going there. And they're saying, well, see, it hasn't messed it up yet. But no, just before the nuclear deal with Iran was kicked into motion, 5 U.S. prisoners were released in a prisoner swap. So there's really nothing that we have in terms of the United States as any assurance that what Donald Trump has just done completely undermines our legitimacy in the international community. You can't look at that and say, oh, North Korea still trusts us. No, because North Korea can now look at us and use that as a reason to pull out of the deal at any point, or not to make a deal at all. Because how can they trust the United States when the United States is willing to pull out of an agreement that Iran is still keeping, and so therefore the United States is in violation, creating the conditions for regime change? All that means is that so long as the Kim regime is tolerable, then maybe the United States will keep their agreement. But as soon as the Kim regime is no more desirable and we want to change the regime, then fine, we'll tear up whatever agreement we have with them, because our agreements are not being kept. And with that position, or with that reality rather, in the mind of all the players, not just in North Korea, but future agreements, what reason do they have to trust the United States? So now we have isolated ourselves and we have undermined the word of the American people. There's an article in the National Review, which is a very conservative-leaning outlet, and it was written by Andrew McCarthy. It's called Trump Dumps Iran Deal. Hallelujah. And they go through a couple of arguments. It contradicts everything that I just said. And I want to read and quote several quotes from this article so that we can compare and contrast and dissect their arguments and juxtapose against mine. One of the premise of the article, one of the premises is that this is not an example of America not keeping its word because it was not an official treaty. And one of the reasons it's not an official treaty, according to the article, is this, quote, Obama did not seek to make his deal a treaty precisely because he knew America was not giving its word. The public did not support the deal. Well, that's actually not true, right? The president of the United States was facing an intransigent Congress that would disagree. Hell, they absolutely undermined their own policies in order to oppose Obama, who adopted their policies in hopes of finding some way of reaching consensus on various topics. For example, healthcare. Obamacare is a Republican idea, but Republicans fought it as though it was a socialist idea because Republicans had one goal, and that was to destroy President Obama. They had no intention of giving President Obama a single victory. And so it was going to become impossible for the president to get this deal done based on his domestic politics. But his responsibility to the United States and the international community suggested that this deal was worthwhile doing. Now, here's the argument. The argument, notwithstanding whether or not you agree with President Obama's tactic in order to get this approved, despite not having all of the members of 3/4 of the Senate approve, that's neither here nor there. The fact of the matter is the president of the United States entered into an agreement in the international community on behalf of the United States. And now the subsequent president is withdrawing. Here's the problem. The article is trying to say this isn't America's word that is being turned on or being violated. It's Obama's word. Do you honestly think that the international community cares at all about domestic politics in the United States. They're looking for the forward-facing foreign policy of the president of the United States. They don't care what the president had to do in order to get this deal signed based on an intransigent Congress that refused to cooperate with their president. They don't care about that. They're not going to look at that and say, well, think about it. Is North Korea honestly, Andrew, I'm talking to Andrew, is North Korea honestly going to say, well, President Obama really didn't do that properly according to the Constitution. So, it's not really, Trump's not violating America's word. Trump is violating Obama's word. That's a juvenile understanding and interpretation of foreign policy that is not going to happen. Every nation going forward will simply look and say the United States cannot keep its word. So that's one of the primary arguments in the National Review. The second argument came in this paragraph where it said, quote, they, speaking of supporters of the deal, rationalized this dereliction with the nostrum that an unverifiable delay in nuclear weapons development coupled with Iran's coup in reestablishing lucrative nice sleight of hand right there. I had to stop. Iran's coup. They're labeling the Iranian nuclear deal as a coup. Let me start the paragraph again. They, meaning supporters of the Iranian nuclear deal, rationalized that this dereliction with the nostrum that an unverifiable delay in nuclear weapons development coupled with Iran's coup in reestablishing lucrative international trade relations would tame the revolutionary jihadist regime such that it would be a responsible government by the time the delay ended. Meantime, we would exercise an oh-so-sophisticated brand of strategic patience as the mullahs continued abetting terrorism, mass murdering Syrians, menacing other neighbors, evolving ballistic missiles, crushing domestic dissent, and provoking American military forces, even abducting our sailors on the high seas. Okay. This goes to the core of both the fallacious argument against the deal as well as why the deal is necessary. Because without regime change, they're literally creating the opponents to the nuclear agreement are creating a condition that is going to force either a regime change or force this current regime to have a nuclear weapon. This is the conditions that they are creating. Everything that they outlined here with Iran instigating or provoking American military forces, evolving ballistic missiles, which, by the way, is not in violation of the agreement. It may be in violation of a UN resolution that addresses their development of ballistic missiles, but it's not in violation of this agreement. So even says the former CIA chief Mike Pompeo, who's now Secretary of State. All these things that they're saying, the support of terrorism, state-sponsored terrorism, their involvement in the Syrian civil war, these things are relatively true to greater or lesser extent based on the hyperbole in this passage, right? Can't say it's categorically true because some of the things I digress. You get the point, right? These are issues with the regime, but hello, are we going to institute a regime change? We see how well that worked with Iraq. We've seen how well that works, or rather, let me stop being sarcastic. We see how well that does not work. Yes, there are problems with the regime. So here are the options. Literally, the options are regime change or regime change war, or allow this current regime to obtain nuclear weapons. This was why it is so necessary for this agreement to stand. Because it quite frankly did buy the international community time to bring Iran into the fold. And this is ultimately what they do not want. This is, when I say they, this is the right-wing Israeli government led by Benjamin Netanyahu, the neoconservatives in the United States, Saudi Arabia. They do not want a non-isolated, weakened Iran. That is their goal. And so for Iran to be assimilated into the international community as a standard player on the international stage, very similar to what North Korea is looking to get. For Iran to get that is a direct threat to the goals of neoconservatives in the United States of America, to the right-wing government currently in charge of Israel, and to Saudi Arabia, all of whom are seeking a weakened Iran. And so for them, this is not to paint Iran as a benevolent actor. But what's happening is those three nations are trying to make it seem as though because Iran has very problematic politics and because they are not a benevolent actor, we should overthrow them. I mean, if that's the case, let's just take a look at what's happening in Yemen. If you really want to see violations that constitute war crimes that are an offense and an affront to humanity, let's just take a look at what's going on in Yemen. But enough with the whataboutism. It just on the mere facts alone, we have a choice when it comes to nuclear weapons and rogue regimes. The choice is overthrow their regime, which never goes well for the United States of America or the immediate region or the nation, the globe for that matter. Or we get a pathway for that regime to be assimilated into the international community. And that's what the Iranian nuclear deal did. But don't take my word for it. Listen to the man behind the deal.
This is a good deal if you think Iran's open to change. It's also a good deal if you think that Iran is implacably opposed to the United States and the West and our values.
But surely a better deal if it changes.
And the reason is this. My goal when I came into office was to make sure that Iran did not get a nuclear weapon and thereby trigger a nuclear arms race in the most volatile part of the world. Ideally, we would see a situation in which Iran, seeing sanctions reduced, would start focusing on its economy, on training its people, on reentering the world community, to lessening its provocative activities in the region. But if it doesn't change, we are so much better if we have this deal in place than if we don't. And so I think that there are different trends inside of Iran. I think there are hardliners inside of Iran that think it is the right thing to do to oppose us, to seek to destroy Israel, to cause havoc in places like Syria or Yemen or Lebanon. And then I think there are others inside of Iran who think that this is counterproductive. And it is possible that if we sign this nuclear deal, we strengthen the hand of those more moderate forces inside of Iran. But the key point I want to make is the deal is not dependent on anticipating those changes. If they don't change at all, we're still better off having the deal.
Now, granted, the former President Obama did not outline why he thinks it is a good deal, even if the regime doesn't change its ways. But there's plenty of, we can make the argument on behalf of just the sheer logic of it, taking away Iran's immediate capacity to gain a nuclear weapon without the necessity for war or regime change. That's benefit number one. Benefit number two, the ability to inspect and have inspectors. And then if at some future date, those inspectors are ousted from the country, it's an immediate signal to the international community that Iran has not changed, and then therefore we need to do something else. Three, it at least gives it does strengthen, and he mentioned this, but he didn't underscore it. It strengthens the moderates in Iran. But now the strength is in the hands of the hard right-wing portions, conservative portions of the Iranian government. I mean, we really should just find a place for all the far right-wing religious ideologues to go and destroy each other. I mean, take the far right from the United States with the far right from Israel, with the far right from Iran, and just put them in some kind of gladiator stadium and let them just have it out, because that's what they ultimately want. The rest of us just want to be left the hell alone to live our lives. But I digress. That's just a tangent. But let's listen to the response from Iran.
The United States officially announced tonight that it pays no attention to international commitments. We have come to this conclusion that Trump is a person who is not loyal to international commitments, and he will not remain loyal to JCPOA.
I'm sorry. Tell me again, National Review, how this won't be seen as America violating its word, but just violating Obama's word because of the technicality of how it was passed in the face of staunch Republican opposition to anything the president wanted to accomplish during the 2015 signing of this agreement. Tell me again how the international community is not going to notice that America can't keep its agreements. Tell me again how the United States is not going to be isolated, because for the European Union, they're speaking to Iran directly around the United States. The UN Secretary General speaking to the world around the United States, despite the United States of America, all because of Trump's hubris. And I must admit, but I have to always put into this equation that this has been the plan of neoconservatives for a very long time. Let's take you back to the beginning of the Trump administration. This has been like they used Benjamin Netanyahu's ridiculous and comical presentation as justification, but this has been the goal of the Trump administration since before the Trump administration was an administration. But take a listen to, remember Michael Flynn before he got indicted? This is what he had to say to Iran almost like the first week, literally the first week on the job.
Iran continues to threaten U.S. friends and allies in the region. The Obama administration failed to respond adequately to Tehran's malign actions, including weapons transfers, support for terrorism, and other violations of international norms. The Trump administration condemns such actions by Iran that undermine security, prosperity, and stability throughout and beyond the Middle East, and which places American lives at risk. President Trump has severely criticized the various agreements reached between Iran and the Obama administration, as well as the United Nations, as being weak and ineffective. Instead of being thankful to the United States in these agreements, Iran is now feeling emboldened. As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice.
And yet another clip the very last word. Michael Flynn said, as of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice. And thankfully, he was indicted shortly thereafter, or he had to resign, and then he was indicted. And so Michael Flynn, representing the neoconservative wing, this is just a continuation of the same thought process. Now Donald Trump has Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State, and despite him admitting 3 weeks ago that Iran was not in violation, he's going headlong into this. John Bolton, of course, who wrote back in 2015, the best way to keep Iran from getting a bomb is by bombing Iran. He called in the New York Times, called for an immediate attack on Iran. They have no greater desire in their life than to attack Iran. And it's part of a long-term plan that neoconservatives have had for decades to rewrite, to restructure the Middle East to service American hegemony. And their excuse in this case is continuously the same refrain over and over again. Iran is not a good actor on the international stage. Iran is despotic. Iran suppresses dissent. Iran sponsors terrorism. Iran has a litany of very problematic policies, positions, and interactions on the international stage. Yet this agreement was never meant. It was not necessary for us to stop Iran from being a bad guy, for us to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Do you understand the fallaciousness of that argument? That in order for the only way that we can reasonably not go to war with Iran was to force them to first become the perfect good guy according to neoconservative standards. This agreement was never meant to do that. This agreement was to say, well, listen, we have what we have in Iran and they are in power and we are not going in to change their regime. So that being the case, let's keep a nuclear weapon out of their hands. And the hypocrisy of this to suggest that we only make deals in the international community with benevolent actors or actors that are good according to American standards. Or, you know, and in some cases, again, I want to reiterate, just good based on some human rights standards. It's not as though Iran is not a problem. But the United States has made plenty of agreements with plenty of dictators, plenty of brutal regimes in order to keep something worse from happening. And in this case, the worst is a nuclear weapon. And now the neoconservatives who have always had it out for Iran, who want nothing more than to overthrow, not just to overthrow the regime, but to fundamentally reshape the entire nation to their service. Now they have the perfect moron in the White House, who, for no other reason than to oppose Barack Obama, is willing to put America in this precarious position, as well as the international community, in danger. That's all the time I have for you today. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.